Hi, I'm Simon Garnett,
And I'm Laura Halliday.
and this is The Persuasion Game, the Forge's podcast all about the art of persuasion.
Each episode, we connect with marketers, business leaders, and beyond to learn how they use persuasion to influence their consumers, convince their stakeholders, and drive their business forward. Simon, hello.
Hi, Laura, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. And I think I'm having a good day, but you're having an even better day because today we are talking about a subject that is really close to your heart, both personally and at work. We're talking about sustainability.
I was speaking to someone the other day who was making the point, which is actually we're all in sustainability now. We might not have the word in our title. We might not want to be, potentially for some people, but it is just the reality. You know, this is part of our job, is to find the way to be persuasive, to help consumers be more sustainable in their lives and ensure that our products and our services and whatever it is that we're marketing is being part of the solution to help us get to combat the most existential threat that humanity faces.
And we are seeing that a lot in the trends work we're doing, where people are saying to brands, what are you going to do about it? And it becomes, very much a hygiene factor rather than something people are going to pat you on the back for. Joss is obviously going to talk to us about some ways that we can still bring a sense of excitement, play and wonder to that whole experience.
And I'm really looking forward to that because I think so often this narrative can be couched in some pretty dry or possibly even worse, depressing and difficult to engage with. And it's a fine line between being truthful and what Rupert Reed calls hopium, that sort of false hope that everything will be fine. And how do you get that balance right to be able to positively persuade and encourage rather than make people just stick their head in the sand and go, well, there's nothing more I can do. I'll just ignore it. On today's episode, we're really excited to welcome Joss Ford, the founder of Enviral, a communications agency on a mission to winning the war on boring sustainability stories. They're dedicated to helping brands gain competitive advantage through creatively, credibly, and consistently communicating future sustainable brands.
Joss really is a trailblazer in the sustainability space, and through his agency, he helps companies not only operate more sustainably, but also transparently share their environmental impact through powerful campaigns, strategies, and content. Known for his bold, outspoken views on greenwashing and using media to help tackle our global challenges, he is here to share his insights on how effective communication can drive real change. Welcome, Joss.
Hello. Well, look at that. That's an intro and a half, isn't it?
Excited to talk to you today. Can you share a little bit more about your background and what it is you do?
Well, that was a very succinct introduction. But yeah, I'm Joss, and I'm a nature lover. I'm a brand guy. I fell in love with skateboarding around the age of 8, which really got me into brands who were really up for thinking against the grain. Brands that were really interested in building communities, and all centered around this sport which was built around progression. That was a really kind of formative time. I didn't know it at the time, but kind of got me into the love of art. It got me into the love of influence, and also got me into the love of how brands can genuinely be creative. Now, most skateboarding brands aren't massively profitable, huge multinationals, but it really kind of showed me the fundamentals of what I thought brand building could be. And went to university, studied environment and business, and in the second year of university, was daydreaming in a lecture and came up with Enviral. And long story short, that's where we are now.
And how is it that you engage with the people you help, and how do you help them?
Yeah, so we do strategy, creative, and advertisement, and we've got a series of partners who kind of fill in the rest. So we are a full service communications agency, as you mentioned in the intro, on a mission to win the war on boring sustainability stories. We all know that sustainability is everything. It's the fundamentals to human existence. I think it's the fundamentals to the future relevance of business, and the benefits that sustainable brands get if they credibly, creatively, and consistently communicate what they do that's higher than just profit. It's plentiful. And so we work with organizations who are either core sustainable brands. So we work with a lot of organizations, for example, looking at carbon solutions and specifically in climate change, lots of NGOs, lots of charities. But we also work with organizations who are going through transformation, and every business and every employee on the planet is in sustainability now, whether they know it or they like it. And just trying to make sure that they remain relevant, and they kind of bring creativity and strategy into everything they're doing.
And so you've got two groups of people. One perhaps where you've got the NGOs who are more about trying to persuade other people to engage, and you're kind of galvanizing their strategies. And then you've got presumably a group where perhaps they're looking to understand a bit more about it, trying to find ways to engage. Should we start by talking about the sort of NGO end? What are the kind of persuasion challenges that you find with those kind of audiences? How do you find you kind of help unlock their ability to persuade others?
NGOs or charities have got a core mission to be more credible and to do more things. Often the persuasion tactics there are around the fact that they've got a limited budget, and if they've got a budget of X for a year and they want to do they want to be really prevalent over 5 moments in time, but it dilutes the budget. The conversation that we often have is around, well, like let's prioritize budget around 2 of those moments, because you're going to basically get best bang for buck in getting in front of your core audience, but also outside of the echo chamber to new audiences, rather than perhaps just blending in over 5 moments in time. And that conversation doesn't necessarily always look like a kind of a persuasion tactic. It's actually around perhaps facilitating them with knowledge that we have from other NGOs and other conversations on how to have conversations internally, for different people, say in marketing, to speak to other people at different layers or different departments within the company to say, actually, I think that we are going to get a better ROI if we just focus our spend here or here. Not really persuading them to be better or bigger, but perhaps
amplifying their efforts and giving them the right tools to have the conversations.
Exactly.
And then I suppose it's slightly different in a corporation where that's not necessarily as baked in.
Yeah, totally. And every business, no matter where they got founded from or what heritage they have, is now in sustainability, and every employee is in sustainability, whether they like it or they don't, or if they might not even know that they're in it just yet. But the reality is that the transition that's happened in the last decade, since kind of founding Enviral, the first part of that decade was let's just not work with people and just work with the good guys, whereas the second kind of part of the journey, I think, is more around how do we help the biggest organizations with heritage, with customers, with audiences, with employees, with resources and money and time to credibly transform. And as you say, the persuasion tactics are different. And it's often around the fact that they've either got a want or a need to transform. And I think the knowledge of why they want to credibly communicate sustainability is at the heart of the conversation. And actually what's really interesting is that decision makers who have got teenage children are often the ones that have got a internal family pressure, which makes them want to invest more or be a bit bolder, which is
the lobbyist is coming from inside the house.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the questions we always kind of have at the start is like, so tell me about kind of what's outside of work. You got any kids? Because that often can lead to us doing bigger and bolder campaigns, which is an interesting insight. But the reality is that no matter if it's a want or a need to do things properly, you can't do that if it's not at the center of the DNA of the organization. And, we'll get briefs that come in that have been totally created by the sustainability department or the marketing department, or, from a CEO. But it needs an outside third-party organization to actually bring these departments together. And, not just sustainability and marketing departments who, I don't know why, but they really are struggling to communicate to each other en masse at the moment. But to look at the entire workforce. And that's where that authenticity often comes from.
There's a really interesting analogy that you've talked about there, which is within your client base, there are different motivations. There are some who are very engaged and who are absolutely pushing this. And there are others for whom it's possibly more of a don't necessarily want to, but absolutely need to, through to, I'm assuming, some people who are positively recalcitrant and kind of, hesitant about it and really sort of pushing back against it. And of course, that mirrors the reality outside of business, the population at large. And one of the challenges, one of the criticisms that can get leveled at the sustainability initiatives and communications and companies is that there's a bit of an echo chamber, that they're talking to themselves, that they're not engaging more broadly. What successes have you had? What have you learned about how do you engage a wider, broader audience to drive real scale change?
Yeah, we could talk for a whole podcast series on this topic alone. And the reality is that in 2018, 90% of climate communications went to just 20% of people. And it has changed. We've had these fundamental moments, a Swedish teenage girl creating a sustainability movement that has effectively turned climate into the largest social movement that humans have ever had. We've had moments like COP26 where we suddenly saw brands putting kind of their money where their mouth is a little bit, at least for a few months. But that often is just a moment in time and it kind of dilutes very quickly. So it's very easy for you to perhaps do a certain set of initiatives as an individual, like give up meat for a month in January or, cycle to work 2 days of the week. And that's great. But the reality is that when you've got a media narrative, or you've just got a realism narrative that what you're doing over here, when you've got big businesses doing what they're doing over here, it's just insurmountable. And that friction, especially in the last couple of years, I feel has really stunted action. And it's probably kind of like divided the echo chamber even further than it used to be, which is a real shame because, tell me the next time we're going to have a Swedish teenagers strike on a Friday afternoon and it create a global movement. It's unexpected and it led to some really monumental things. I know you asked me about successes that we've got, but let's just talk about the general industry for a section. Like we've got everyone within sustainability who might be doing their own, that's flying a flag for their own kind of mission, calling each other out. You've got people who are fighting for the kind of meat-free movement, people who are fighting for a plastic-free movement, or you've got, regenerative farming and biodiversity net gain saying that they're not doing it right. And that just causes confusion within that 20% that we talked about. And that perspective of, progress over perfection is something that as an industry, we really suffer from. And we need to somehow figure out a way to unchain that.
I think that's absolutely fascinating because I recognized that just yesterday. I had exactly that. I posted something, an article I had written, and pretty much within a few hours, I had someone else who basically is just arguing for a slightly different version, telling me that I'd misrepresented or misunderstood something. And it was this strangely weird dynamic where you're kind of like, these are two sides of the same coin. We both want the same thing. We're trying to do the same thing. And I see this all the time. Why do you think that is? That there's almost seems to be a conflict, a kind of desire to sort of outdo somebody. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it is society as it is at the moment. If we're looking at we look at Brexit, it's basically 50-50. It feels like sustainability rightly should be black and white. It's either you should do something or you shouldn't do something. Or it's this perspective of like, you're either perfect or just don't be involved in it at all. If we look at vegetarianism or veganism or people who take flights, it's like you either don't fly at all or you just don't care about sustainability, or you're either totally vegan or you're cheating if you've just had cheese once or you've eaten meat once. It's like the worst thing in the world if that happens. And there's no like flexibility in the fact that this is about progress, not perfection. And the problem that we've got, I really think in the workplace, is that gets amplified even further because individuals, they've all got their own personal missions. And if certain things aren't ticked at a specific level for those individuals or to the expectations of the business or the client, then it's not perfect. And therefore somebody's not winning. And therefore it's deflated even before the thing actually goes out. And that's a thing that really, really needs to be looked at in this industry.
So I think one thing that's really interesting that we've seen in a lot of the data that gets presented to us is one of the challenges that consumers don't always want to engage with sustainability as a kind of hook, as a reason to buy. So, often we hear data saying 75% of the population, it's a great thing to add, but it's not enough of a reason to buy the product. And I think there are some brands that kind of really struggle with that and are trying to look for ways to actually wake people up and engage them and make them care a bit more. Is that something that you can think of some interesting examples from in terms of how people have been motivated?
Yeah, 100%. And look, like, as much as I've just had a bit of a doom and gloom message over there, we've just got to remember that this space and the 10 years that I've been running this business and been interested in sustainability communications, it's just changed so rapidly, such an amazing way. So, I mean, look, we've worked with loads of different organizations, from high street banks to Greenpeace, and the general elements of success, I think, kind of boil down to a few ingredients. One of them is around vulnerability, and that vulnerability message of we're on a journey, we're not quite perfect. That's a bit kind of 2020 now, and it's great that narrative is there, that you're not patting yourself on the back for the small achievements without actually addressing the elephant in the room over here. I do really believe that in the kind of 2010s, where you have that big motivational ambition, that target, that this is what the future is going to be, this is where our company is going to be by 2050, that has actually been really, really important to the sustainability movement, because it's brought momentum and energy and optimism and an imagination more than anything into this space. But now there's a reality of like, holy shit, how do we do this by 2030 or 2050? Because it's really expensive. It's really not that streamlined. All of the people who are the solutions to actually meeting those targets, well, one, there's no investment into them at the moment, and two, they're all building the plane whilst flying it anyway, and it's not a really streamlined process to having this lofty ambition over here. And there's a set of realism that's come into the fold now, and I think the vulnerability now is to say, okay, well, look, like, this is the reality of the scenario. We didn't try hard enough, but the ambition is still there. So how are we going to do it? And the reality is that we're gonna do it by these steps and in these timeframes. But we're gonna need more than just ourselves to do this. And speaking in that very open, vulnerable narrative, in a human lens, really, to me, is where certain organizations, especially B2B organizations, are doing it really, really well. And then on the other side of the coin, when we're looking at perhaps more mission-driven organizations, the ingredients to kind of to engaging wider audiences is around actually including them. So, we talked about Greenpeace just now. We ran campaign 3 years ago, which we also ran this year with them, called the Big Plastic Count. It's a citizen science campaign, which effectively means that you get citizens to take part in a study underneath the brand, in this case called the Big Plastic Count, to count household plastic consumption for 1 week in May, and this year 1 week in March, and to curate real life statistics and data that could be taken to the government, taken to supermarkets, to show that this is like a live audit of consumption. And we had one in every 250 households in the UK take part for 1 week in May, and we made it really creative. We had a bit of kind of gamification to it. It was really inclusive. The content that we were creating, really wanted to make sure that it appealed to households up and down the country. Made it super family focused. We brought it into schools and universities, and it created a load of people wanting to say, you know what, I want to do my bit. I want to tell the government to do something about it. And it educated individuals on things like much needed plastic depository systems, where you put value on plastic, which loads of countries around the world have, by the way. And I'm a big believer that consumers buy what's in front of them. So supermarkets have got a huge responsibility to look at their packaging solutions. And all of this data was taken to both parties, but nothing has really happened. The people who can actually do something don't listen. How demotivational is that? And it feels like, where there has been some really successful communications campaigns and behavior change campaigns, often, it gets 80 to 90% the way there. But the real crux of it doesn't happen because there's certain parties who are in control and in decision making that perhaps aren't doing their bit when everybody else is doing theirs. So,
Joss, one of the things we would love to hear from you is your perspective around the idea of sustainability marketing. It's a concept that obviously is talked about an awful lot. And at The Forge, we're increasingly actually a believer that notion is slightly outdated, and instead we should be talking about marketing in a sustainability world. I'd just be interested in your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, really, really big question. I totally agree with you. Sustainability shouldn't be like the primary USP for an organization. It should be embedded deeply into organizations' values. The brands like the Ben and Jerry's or the Tony's Chocolonelys, you can tell that I'm a big kind of sweet tooth there with me starting with those two. Or
you're amongst friends.
A Finisterre-esque brand. All the way to kind of brands like Velux Windows on a B2B perspective. They live and breathe sustainability, and they're all very vulnerable that they haven't completed it because it's not something that you can complete. And they communicate within their marketing mix a higher purpose as part of their marketing mix, but not as their entirety. What I would say, which is really interesting, is that I believe that sustainability needs to be communicated more within a typical business language. And if we are looking at the responsibility for business specifically, which is very native around things like growth and competitive advantage, why not look at sustainability from a competitive sustainability lens and show that companies who do properly focus on ESG, they get greater market share, they get better talent, they get better investment opportunities, and effectively the long-term brand building is much more effective.
It's a really interesting kind of analogy, isn't it? Which is your big point here is around integration. I think is what I'm hearing from you, and it's stop seeing you've got sustainability here and you've got business over here, and that there's sort of binary choices and sort of do one or do the other. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that persuasion that actually let's integrate it. Let's see these as two sides, fundamental kind of relationship between them.
Yeah.
And that those organizations that do that buy that see it, they're the ones that really get that competitive advantage, because it's not a bolt-on, it's not an afterthought, it's not something extra that you do. It is absolutely integral to everyday behavior as a business.
Yeah, and let's bring some creativity and some fun and some joy back into it as well. Like it's a really, really heavy thing, us looking at effectively solving the biggest global challenges on our planet. But actually, people are fed up with the doom and gloom message. We need to show that the kind of prosperity that comes with the solutions that exist. We need to be able to show that actually it can create much more vibrant, fun, enjoyable societies if taken seriously. And I think that communications is absolutely fundamental to that, and imagination and transporting, a viewer or a specific audience set to this future world and showing what's possible is a phenomenal thing. And communications has just got such an amazing role to play in that. But I would say that sustainability on the whole is typically pretty boring. I worry that, the twofolds, like we were talking about, either organizations are scared to talk about it, so they don't talk about it at all, or it's perhaps moved from this big lofty, okay, like imagine a future 2050, motivational, really big message to a bit more of a realism message now, which is a bit more kind of like on the nose of like, what are we actually doing? That's not that sexy. That's not that interesting. So what we've got to do is kind of meet in the middle. We've got to lean on creatives, especially. Every time I speak to creatives, whether they're graphic designers, creative directors, videographers, artists, I'm always blown away at their ability to effectively communicate certain narratives in ways that really connect us. And effectively, good marketing companies are in the business of making people feel things. And if we can do that with a bit more kind of a lighthearted, even silly, I would even say, kind of narrative, it breaks those boundaries of like, oh, sustainability is only for them, and I'm not perfect, so I'm not even going to get involved.
I think that taps into something really interesting, which is, if you look at marketing maybe 20 years ago around sustainability, there was quite a lot of humor. I'm remembering like Below Water had a whole thing about like the penguins are super cross with us. And I think now that would be seen as like really inappropriate, crass, it's not of the time anymore. I suppose the convergent view is there's quite a lot of shame and shaming and, as you said, calling people out.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in that when it comes to through the lens of persuasion, because obviously there is a very strongly held view within the Clean Creatives Champion, which is there are certain businesses that we do not work with them. Nobody should work with them. And one of the points that we've been talking about throughout this narrative is about the importance of trying to get away from absolutist positions. That absolutist positions aren't necessarily the most persuasive, that they encourage people to shut down, to shame. I'm interested in how you feel about those discussions, those narratives, and how do we address that challenge in the most constructive way, which is going to get people to really engage and consider, and not just shut down and retrench to an established view.
Yeah, and it's an area of concern for me where 590 agencies still want to work with fossil fuel brands when they haven't got their own sustainability departments in a place which are really credible. And like, I am a big believer of the biggest organizations transforming. I know full well the investments that the likes of Primark are making within the transparency of their supply chain. It's actually like really fascinating what organizations are doing. If we put 5 of the biggest players in our space, in the sustainability consultancy and communication space together, they all kind of went into one mass holding company. You go to somebody like Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola's sustainability department is bigger than all of those 5 organizations put together. There are good people in bad companies, but what there isn't is a credible link between client and agency on a fossil fuel level agenda of transformation that is credible enough. I think gone are the days where employees especially can see through the decision makers who say that it's fine still to work with these types of brands when they don't have the expertise to actually transform them.
Thank you. I mean, that's brilliant and very interesting and valued perspective. To play devil's advocate, if you did put together the 5 biggest sustainability organizations, as you say, and you do have that expertise, in that theoretical world, would that agency then work with? Because
100%,
is it about the skills within the agency, or is it about the intent within the client?
It's a really interesting narrative, right? Because again, it's where things used to be very much black and white. Now we have a level of realism that we've gone past 1.5 degrees pre-industrial levels. We're on course for at least 3, if not 4 degrees. Our human civilization will be wiped out. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And the reality is that where is the line for the best people on this planet, the best scientists, the best transformation coaches or consultancies? Where's the line of saying, well, actually, like we need a super group now, and it just feels like it needs a level of genuine commitment from fossil fuel boards and investors who are effectively looking for high yielding returns to say, okay, we're up for a risk now to completely transform our organization because we're not dependent on the shareholders' decision to actually say we want to change, and we'll put it into a legal contract that we are going to change, but we need the best people to guide us on that transformation. That hasn't been done. That needs to happen. I think if that did happen, you would totally see the best people in this space stand up and look at how the money, expertise, talent of the likes of the Shells and the BPs and the Saudi Aramcos of the world could be utilized for the renewable revolution. And that's a very exciting thing. But actually, in a system that we're in at the moment, which is very much kind of a capitalistic driven system, it feels like there would have to be some level of intervention at a higher level to basically either legally make that a requirement, or some superhero CEO who can really beneficially persuade lots of different stakeholders to change.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Joss. It's been really, really interesting.
Amazing. Thank you, Joss, for your time. Really enjoyed the discussion.
And thank you guys. Yeah, really nice way to spend a Friday.
So, Laura, another great conversation. What stood out to you?
I think what Joss really articulated well is something that I've heard Margaret Atwood talk about as well, which is this idea that sometimes we attempt to talk about climate change and there is almost a sense of, well, that's weather, isn't it? I think if you think about it as an everything change, which is what Margaret Atwood calls it, and you think about how that's going to impact society, how that's going to see the rise of populist movements, how that's going to affect migration, you get a really strong sense of skin in the game, and that you're going to be affected by this, and that it's something that you really need to think about.
I think for me, that the thing that really resonated was the risk in these things of getting to a very absolutist position that encourages us to pull things apart when really we should be making connections, that encourages us just to kind of go, well, what are you doing about that thing, rather than recognizing the interconnectedness of these things. For me, there was some sort of evocations of one of the things that I always think that is just a human reality when it comes to global and local marketing teams, which is if you're in a local team, you're just human nature. You're very just hardwired to focus on the 10, 15, 20% that's different and bespoke to your market. If you're in a global role, you're hardwired, your vested interests are in the 80, 85, 90% that's the same. And I think we can see some parallels with this, which is if we really want to engage and persuade and bring people together, we've got to search for the commonalities and not be purist and absolute about the micro differences that frankly are window dressing in comparison to the big issue, and trying to find that common ground, trying to make the connections where we are seeing things in the same way is so integral for persuasion.
And I guess also, to your point, trying to find the right level of progress versus perfection.
Something I'm genuinely really worried about, which is the green hushing concern. Green washing gets so much noise, but I think green hushing ultimately could actually be the slightly bigger concern we have, because unless we're sharing those positive stories of progress, people lose hope and belief.
Indeed. Thanks for listening. If you'd love to hear more from marketers, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about how to use the art of persuasion to drive your business forward, make sure you're following the podcast in your favourite podcast app.
And just the last ask from us. This is a new podcast, and we'd love it if you could be persuaded to help us spread the word by telling somebody else about it, leaving us a review, or even better, sharing an episode on socials. Search for The Forge on LinkedIn.